one was, now the recordings, okay, good. And so does worship disrupt the status quo of our lives and our world? So we started kind of just starting with these questions and creating, sort of worship and songs and all that kind of stuff around those kinds of things. So no answers here, but in many ways, we think this conversation and those kind of questions are questions that could be a great process for you to enter into with your congregation. And, really starting maybe with that question about, does our worship match our theology? Another question go ahead. Tracy? Okay. No worries. We'll just keep moving along. We don't need slides unless you need slides. Okay. So one of the questions that I think is fascinating is thinking about the question about why people actually come to worship. I think it's a fascinating question. And, there's these, sorry, I can't show you the slide. Maybe we're getting there. There's a statistic that talks about the top reasons that adults give for attending worship services. I think it's the next slide after that, maybe 2 more. There it is. I don't know if these are really the true answers, quite honestly, because when you're being asked things in a poll, I don't know. But, they're saying things like to become closer to God, so children will have a moral foundation, to make me a better person, for comfort in times of trouble. Those are the top reasons. But I don't know if you've ever sat down with people at your congregation. Raise your hand if you have, and asked this question. So why do you come to worship? I'd love to hear, what are some of the answers that you've gotten? There's a microphone right here. So pass it. Yeah, we could just pass it. Pass that around. We're just trying to get it on the microphone.
It's good for accessibility.
He said, to see my friends.
Yeah.
My people said habits.
Oh.
And then they were chagrined and embarrassed, but they said that was really truly the first thing that came to mind. Wow. I've got lots of people in their 90s.
Yes.
It's what you do on Sunday. And it's not really a Sunday decision. It's just,
that's what I do.
You're going to be there unless you are infirm.
Yeah. Anybody else ever asked that question of a congregation? Yes.
The other extensions of that is, it's what I was taught.
Yeah.
And it's who I am.
Yeah.
Just to show up, just to be there. There's a sense that it's both an obligation and a promise and an identity aspect.
Yeah.
To just being present in that space with those people on that day for that combined purpose. And there's something beautiful about that and dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think that one of the things that we would like to talk about today is how we could sort of help ask some of these questions and sort of begin to ask questions about what we're doing when we're planning worship, and how our worship that we're doing right now is kind of reflecting our theology. And one of the things that we always think it's good to start with is reimagining our metaphors. You want to go to that slide? Yeah. Our worship it's kind of like when we talk about metaphors, we're saying, like when you're inviting somebody to worship and you're saying, yeah, our church is kind of like this, giving them an idea of what it's like. So if you go to is your worship like a TED Talk? Is your worship like a concert? Is your worship like a prayer vigil? Would you describe your worship as a protest gathering, an act of resistance? Would you describe it as a dinner party, a love feast with friends? Maybe it's, a casual picnic, or does it feel like a family reunion? Does it feel like a trip to a country club? I mean, all those things I think are very, very important questions in terms of there's kind of an underlying feeling. If you've never been to church before, what's it going to feel like to someone who walks in the door? One of the reasons we started thinking about this, one of the things we started thinking about was this idea about belonging. And this idea about, is your communion, what messages are you bringing across in communion? And how are you serving the bread and cup? Who feels included? Who doesn't feel included? What are the words you say? What are the songs you sing? And I'm going to let Darren talk a little bit about, we have a song called All Belong Here that really came out of conversations about communion that we had within the band. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah. So we as a band pre-COVID would regularly get together, not just to rehearse, but to have lunch and rehearse. And in those lunch conversations, just like you'd imagine with any friends, different things come up. And I also spent time leading worship at Willow Creek. And so coming to the United Methodist denomination, coming to Urban Village Church, having, let me use my theological words, penal substitutionary atonement was not the basis for our worship. But all the songs that I knew, and, trigger warning, all the songs that I knew were about blood just splashing everywhere. And for many in our congregation, and I've experienced this myself, those kinds of songs were associated with deep trauma because they were part of congregations for many. My church has a strong LGBTQ population, strong population of people who've been harmed by church and were done with church. And we're like their last stop before being done with the institutional church altogether. And so people who had been harmed didn't want to hear these familiar, fun for many other people songs. And it's not that communion wasn't important. It's not that this time wasn't important, but as a church, I wanted us to lean into what is this communion about? And we just began to talk about things like welcoming versus belonging. A table that belongs to you is your table. A table that you're welcome to is somebody else's table that you got invited to. And so this idea of belonging, this idea of Jesus made sure everybody ate at that table. Jesus had even those who would betray him at that table. And I even like to say, Jesus had a dinner party at that table. And why is our communion about a gory blood fest when Jesus was having a dinner party? And so we brought this, Lenora does this great thing where she listens to us talk about what things are important, and she weaves those together into beautiful words. And I was like, it needs to be something that you could just sing, just almost like a lullaby, the thing that you just kind of rock with and feel in your soul. And so I don't know how long it was later, but eventually this song All Belong Here came up, and it says these words like, if you're not sure who you really are, it says these words that invite us to bring our scars and our pain, and it reminds us, come and remember who you are here. Do this to remember who I am, whether that's who I am as a person, who God is as the one who's telling us that we belong at this table, all belong here. So this song has been so powerful, and I'm gonna hand the mic over after this. The song has been so powerful because the work that I do in advocacy, I get to be a part of organizations like the Reformation Project or Q Christian Fellowship, where sometimes in those conference settings, that's the only church people do the entire year. And to see people who I know who were in candidacy for being a pastor and were denied because they're queer, people who, because they're trans, were never allowed to be a communion minister in their home churches, to be able to stand and hold the elements and invite people and look them in the eye and say, this is for you. And so to be able to give people the words, I was talking earlier about the vocabulary of worship, to give people the things that they can say to remind each other and to remind themselves that this is for you. You belong here. So I'm gonna go cry now.
No, it was great. Thank you, Darren. Here's one idea that you might just consider is take a look at your communion liturgy as it exists right now, what you've been saying, the words you've been saying, and maybe bring a couple other people who you trust together in your congregation and just sit with it and pray about it and talk about it and say, is this what we want to be saying? Now, I know, Presbyterians have things that they're supposed to say probably, but I don't know, I'm going to just say, maybe you could change them and take a look at them, and maybe they're all perfect, but if there's a more human and welcoming and inviting and affirming way to say these words, you wouldn't have to say them every Sunday, but it might be something you would want to try occasionally just to see how it feels and what happens. Tomorrow we will be having communion and we will be singing All Belong Here. And so you'll get to hear that. And we will demonstrate with some different ways of welcoming people into communion too. So, and I'm sure many of you have done these things already. So I may just be, this may not be a new thought for you, but if you are doing it, I really encourage you to do it, because I think that it makes a huge difference. And the familiar becomes too familiar sometimes, and we don't even hear it anymore. And sometimes when you say things in a new way, you can actually hear things. And it becomes a great place to start in looking at all the things you're doing in worship. Just start with one thing, start easier. Well, sort of easy with communion. Okay. So just let's take a second and, do you have a sense about what metaphor does your church kind of, what's it putting out there? What does it feel like to you right now? Have you thought about that at all? Does anybody want to share anything? Feel free to take that mic over there, and if you want to say anything.
I think one of the reasons we ask about I was just going to say, one of the reasons we ask about the metaphors is that if you start to think about how they compare to genres that are in the culture, people who are new to your experience will interpret your experience through the lens of other genres. And these other genres bring values with them. They bring values, they bring ways of being. So that the values they bring from a rock concert, for example, if they come in and your place seems like a rock concert, the values of rock concerts will come and they will be a part of your experience, So it's very important to kind of look at the values of these genres that we use to see if it's really communicating what we want it to be communicating. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you. I might be a little off topic, but you might be able to weave it back into where you're going. This is an experiential, personal experience that I had during communion. It was during COVID. It was cold, it was wintry and rainy, and we were not in the congregation, in the church. We had a drive-through communion. And that sounds a little maybe pale in comparison to strong communions that you have in your church, but this was sweet. I drove into the little church driveway at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Rehoboth, not knowing what I was going to get. It was raining and cold, and I drove around, and there were 3 or 4 people ahead of me in cars. And I drove up, and there was our pastor standing out in the rain, dispensing communion, and we had a sweet communion service together.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think the congregation I serve, family, is a really strong metaphor with all the wonderful possibilities, right? And all the scary pain and dangers that brings.
Yeah, sometimes family can be a great metaphor for your church, and sometimes it can be, if you're not in the family, if you don't feel like you're in the family, it's really hard to feel like you belong. Yeah, absolutely. And it can be a dysfunctional family, absolutely. I know many of us who have been in churches have been in churches that have really just been one big dysfunctional family. So, yes.
So I think my church might describe themselves as a family, but I think country club might fit them better sometimes. Is there any thought on how we can use worship, meaningful worship, to help reorient people towards the metaphor that they would like, as opposed to the metaphor that they kind of fall back into the familiar pattern of?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably we all have different answers to that question. My first answer would be, is you start, you name that with a group of people and start talking about it. Like, what is our metaphor? Do you think a lot of people might experience us as a country club? What would we like them to, just have the conversation is a great place to start. Leslie, you had a thought too.
I think, when we were pulling this together and as we're going through it and listening to your comments, what keeps coming to me is ritual. And as a Christian church, we don't really use that word a lot on par, the word ritual. And then when we do use it, we relegate it to something specific. But we are ritualistic beings. When you get up in the morning, if you choose to brush your teeth before your coffee versus after your coffee, that's your ritual. We innately create ritual in every aspect of our lives. When you get to work, if you go to your desk first, or if you get your coffee first for the first 4 hours, that's your ritual. And so when we think about our religious settings and how we create, whether we're using our traditional rituals that were passed down via generations based on your specific denomination, that's your ritual. Or if you take the time to assess who you are in the moment as a community and choose to create new rituals. But it gets difficult there because we've been taught that the previous rituals are, in many ways, the law, the right way, the God's way. But it's very specific in the Bible that we all have the Holy Spirit, right? We're all infused with the essence of God and Jesus's word, right? And so our ability to create new rituals, create new meaning, new metaphors is immediately available to us if we understand that unlocking our desire to be close is really based on us acknowledging our rituals and what we're comfortable with. We get comfortable. I don't want coffee before I brush my teeth. I don't roll that way. It doesn't feel comfortable because I've created a habit. But when I acknowledge that it's a habit and it doesn't bring me harm to change it, but it can bring me what I desire, which is connection, if I do choose to change it, it brings differently. So I just wanted to put that out there that we're very married to our rituals because you were saying earlier, identity, right? But when we break it down, we all have rituals because that's the human experience. That's what makes us who we are. And so if we're willing to dial it back and say, but I can change that. That's not a sacrifice. I want to be close,
Love that. Thanks.
I think also with everything, that's beautiful, thank you. Leslie put stuff into words that I'm still fumbling at, so I just always appreciate her. All of these folks do, really. For me, what's been very helpful practically in leading that in congregational settings or in community settings is teaching more of a theology of discomfort, of helping people understand that being uncomfortable or being pulled a little bit outside of your comfort zone is not inherently a bad thing.
I just got to put a big exclamation mark on that. And I've got to say, we've got to get a trademark on the theology of discomfort because that's awesome.
Yeah, well, it's just, to me, I'm leading a series for our church right now in Lent called Being Human. And one of the things we're talking about that it means to be human and to share that experience with God in Jesus incarnate is that we all share in this struggle to grow. We all share in the struggle to be fully embodied, to be fully the people that God created us to be. And some of that comes with discomfort. Some of that comes with God inviting us into spaces where we're growing or we're shifting or we're struggling, or we're kind of pressing up against the bounds that either we've put on ourselves or somebody else has. And it can be really helpful to teach, and you have to do it patiently, but to teach your congregations learning from your discomfort, learning from the places where God kind of pokes and prods you and tugs you out into something else can be really helpful. So I tell them in our new members classes, I used to say, when you come to worship on Sundays, you're probably going to experience about 30% of the time being a little bit out of your familiarity zone. Then I started telling them, well, it's probably going to be more like 60-40. And it's over time. I've been at LaSalle for 5 years now, and I was building on a rich legacy that Gary didn't mention that he also helped to install. But over the years, LaSalle has developed an understanding that to gather together means that I'm intentionally going to displace myself so that you might feel like you have a place here. And then in that experience, in that discomfort, I'm going to learn a little bit more about you, and I'm going to learn a little bit more about God because of the way that God is reflected uniquely in you, that I don't necessarily understand in my comfort zones. So.
Thank you. I love that. So this seems like a great transition to another area we would love to reimagine is reimagining our strategies. Strategies really have to do with like the ways in which we put worship together, the ways in which we meet together, all those kinds of things. Like we were thinking about, if you go to the next slide, the space, the space that we're in, and Gary was already alluding to this, and how we might use that space that we're in. Is it that we're, if you go to the next slide, we're all looking to a speaker at the front of a raised podium, or are we all sitting in a circle? And how does that feel different? And I know many of you have churches in which that's kind of how the configuration is. You feel like you're sort of stuck with that. So that might be a really good conversation to have. Maybe there's a way to, maybe we meet in a different space someplace in the church once a month, or maybe we try to reconfigure the space that we have and see what happens when it's less of a speaker up high and everybody sitting together in a circle. Just a thought. We really love, I don't know if anyone else here has ever visited the congregation, St. Gregory's of Nyssa in San Francisco. Has anyone ever been there? I know, you should be there. I love that service, and one of the reasons the whole space is beautiful, and we go into one room at the beginning where we're all sitting in a circle, and there's some of the more traditional kinds of things you might expect. We sing together, there's a sermon presented. However, at the end of the sermon, there's actually a discussion right in the moment, where people are talking about the sermon and sharing their opinions about it. And then another, sort of singing happens again a little bit. And then we go into this room that you can see on the slide for communion. And the communion is just a table. There are no chairs in there. So I'm sure they have ways to help folks who can't do the standing as well. But for those who can stand, they stand around the table. And not only do we serve communion, all standing around this table in the center together, surrounded by this icon paintings that they have gotten commissioned, which is amazing. But then we also dance. We dance around the communion table. And I got to tell you, it was incredible, and profound. And people get to do that every week. And I was like, wow. And they've reconfigured a very traditional space in order to be able to sort of live out their theology of worship in that space. So if you ever get a chance, definitely go there. If you go to the next slide, one of the things, of course, we've all been dealing with is online worship. And these are just some screenshots from things that people began to do a lot more of during the COVID pandemic, and a lot of preaching online, and people tried it in a lot of different ways. And perhaps you had experiences with that and feelings about that. I know we probably all did as well. So I think one of the things that Darren became this digital pastor coming out of this experience of what are we doing in the online space? And I think we've all been dealing with it. And I don't know if anybody in the group wants to talk about it. I know Jonathan had to deal with it. Yeah. Something we did, I'll just tell you real briefly what we did. If you go a couple more slides. What? Yeah, a couple more slides. One of the ways we responded during the pandemic was we knew we couldn't do concerts. We couldn't come out and do worship together in this way. And so we started creating once a week a online experience for people just to lament together. And it was just a half hour every Wednesday night. And we would just sing a couple songs online and create space for people to share their laments, what was going on in the world, what was going on in their own lives, and to pray for the world together. And we did this online, and we invited people to share, this is on Facebook, we invited people to share their prayers and laments and all this kind of stuff within the Facebook chat. And we were all present in that space. And I have to say, it was church. It was amazing what people did on a week-to-week basis. And we developed basically a congregation together online. I don't know if anybody else wanted to talk about that experience, but for us, it was very meaningful and powerful. And it opened us up to thinking about how we can be a church and how we can be community online, but we have to do it. Sometimes we have to do it differently than we've been doing our traditional worship in a space like, a church building. And I think one of the things that's been beneficial is some of our younger folks in the group who have kind of grown up with, like Hannah, who's kind of grown up with YouTube was her language. And, she's been very helpful in terms of saying, people have this much of a time, attention span online. It has to be visual. It has to, all these kinds of things that we took to heart and really learned how to do because we needed to do that in order to be effective online.
I think the pandemic really showed us all the things that we could do online that we were sort of missing out on before. You saw in the worship service today, we did again and again with the video, that we've never done that before. This is the first time we've done that with a video in a live space like this. And I felt like it was very powerful, and it opened up a whole new realm for people because a lot of people are visualist, like learners, audio learners. So it's like being able to offer multiple ways of understanding something is really cool to be able to do. And we wouldn't have been able to learn how to do that without this lament together thing that we were doing throughout the pandemic. And yeah, I'm sure you all have experienced that as well, how you've learned how to get better at doing some sort of online or not Zoom type stuff over the pandemic.
Yeah, and I also want to acknowledge how we've talked to lots of pastors for whom trying to figure out how to do things online has been like, oh, wait, now I have another job. And it's been very, very difficult. And you don't feel like you have the resources to do that. And anyway, Darren, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was mainly thinking about there's so much power in giving yourself and others permission to fail. Like sometimes we expect church to always be perfect and we like beat ourselves up when it's not. But that stifles our ability to grow, to try new things, and to teach that grace really is sufficient. That if we're going to go into these new places and try these new metaphors and have these conversations, it's not going to work every time the way we wanted it to. And there's this relief, right? Like you go, oh yeah, we're gonna try again next week and we're gonna try something different. And so we, our videos from week one, when everyone's like, oh God, we're at home, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Look very different than our videos at year one. And it's only because we didn't say, oh, well, we did it this way the first time, we got to do it that way forever. We tried different things, and then we had intentions for things. And then sometimes things came in late and sometimes things were early. But in all of that, we figured out, one, how to work together, two, what things are really important, three, how to like create assets, create things that you can go, you know what, we can use this again. This worked really well. And realize that some things, people didn't really respond to that. So we can try something else in that spot.
Let's go to the next slide. I think one of the things that we have also spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about is stories within worship. And I think that part of the traditional worship experience tends to be very propositional truth focused, like someone speaks as a sermon and tells you, and sometimes tells great stories in the midst of it, but it's sort of a particular way of doing the sermon that's kind of you are probably taught at seminary. I didn't go to seminary, so I don't know exactly what you were taught at seminary, you guys tell me. But I do think one of the things that we've discovered along the way is the power of stories and telling stories, both retelling Bible stories, as we showed a little bit this morning, and just the way we read the scripture about, the parables. It was like, well, okay, but we sort of tell it in our own words. There's some sort of power in being able to hear it for the first time in a way that you maybe didn't before. And but then also telling personal stories. I don't know if many of you folks, of course, podcasts, there's all kinds of storytelling podcasts, the Moth Story Hour. People love stories. And I've often wondered, like, what if at your local congregation, you ask people to have a storytelling ministry, and just let's come together and tell our stories to each other, and begin to sort of craft some of these stories, and maybe we'll share them as a part of our worship and see what happens. I was at a church in Chicago once called Gilead, and for the time of confession, someone told a story. And I think the most shocking thing about it was a real confession, and there was not a neat resolution. It was just like, this was a time when I was a really bad person. They told that story. Amen. And we all sat there with this confession in the room in between us. And there was silence, and there was like acknowledgement, and there was like, okay, and it was really powerful and really healing and really memorable. So I just encourage you to think about storytelling and how those kind of truths, both from the Bible and as well as truths from our own lives, could live within worship.
And I also want to check in for those who are online, if you leave a comment or if you want to ask a question, we will have spaces, but please be commenting, and we want to hear from you online as well.
Yeah.
Tracy, let us know.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if we can play this or not, but on the next week, another thing we started doing is doing some more sort of spoken word poetry kinds of things. Started doing this more online and again, sort of in person. Oh, it should be okay. So you could see if you could play it and see if it works. The audio is not able to be heard. Hold on just a second. While they're working on that, so the piece that we did at the worship service today about we are on this earth to love is another example of that, of a spoken word piece. You could see, no one memorized their parts. They were spoken, they were read well. We worked with, everybody works on reading them well, but there was something, we find that it really helps bring people, again, sort of wakes people up in a different kind of way, helps people hear things in a different way. And I don't know if any of you have folks at your church who are into writing. You may not know until you ask them the question, but one of the things that when we were at LaSalle Street Church that we did is we brought in a spoken word poet to one Lent, I think it was, right, Gary?
Several.
Well, I think, there are a lot of people who write, and they often don't, they're not asked to share their writing, or they're a little shy about their writing. And particularly, we would love to develop as many creative people in our congregations as possible, I think, because it is the gifts of the congregation that enliven our worship. It's not bringing in people from the outside. It's giving people in our congregations the opportunity to just explore and discover and to fail and succeed and to bring their contributions wherever they find the best context to use them, whether it's children's ministry or Sunday school. I mean, most of us know that because we've been doing that. That's part of the ministry of the church. But it does enliven the church the more we can do it. And artists are often feel like the church sort of misuses them, just to speak a personal story. And but sometimes we brought in the spoken word artist, for example, and she just asked anybody who would like to come and just discover some writing together. And so we had a group of like 15 people who meet every Saturday during Lent, and just created pieces. And the idea was, we're not going to share these unless you would like us to share them. We're going to just write as personal growth and as spiritual exploration. And then they just all got together at the end and each contributed a few lines and created this great spoken word piece for the end of Lent. So it was a really great time. But I mean, sometimes you can use people in your community like that. If there are spoken word artists you see at a little club, you can say a little spoken word club. Yeah, in one of those small towns. I'm sure you have 3 or 4. But they're on YouTube, and that kind of thing. So anyway, that's, building that creative community is really important.
Okay, so this is one we wrote and put together for one of our lament together.
Say the names. Let them sit on your tongue for a moment.
Hold them like a sweet, savory piece of
The whole
world, the whole story. They did not deserve this.
Does anyone deserve this?
Say their names. Say their names.
Say their names.
They were nameless to me, to you,
To most of us.
until yesterday, last week,
Last year.
last time.
They were the oh no, not again.
The one mores who died at the hands of hate and greed and power and fear.
Say their names.
Say their names. Mourn as you hold each one like your baby,
Each name.
like it was your child.
Say their names.
Say their names like you're praying, because you are. Start with Jesus and just keep going. Say their
Names.
So, yeah. I still get emotional when I see that. And one of the gifts of being a writer is getting to work with amazing creative people. And I want to give a lot of credit to Hannah Rand, who has been putting together these videos. And this is all with found footage and found photography that you can find too on sites like Unsplash and Pexels, and putting it together, teaching herself how to do this kind of thing.
Can I just mention that I would love for you to do these things yourself, but if you need help or anything, these are all for sale. You know, like these on our shop, themanyarehere.com. You can find these videos cheap. Like for all of you small church people, this you could buy this for $10, and you could show it in your congregation anytime you wanted. Do small group worship, all that kind of.
Yeah, so go ahead.
For those who are online and missed it, the question was about, the question was about if you could use our productions and about how copyright works. For all the things that we make available, you have permission to use it, and the licensing and all that's been taken care of on our end. So yes, you can use it. Now, the funny thing is the way the algorithms and the automated things work, even our videos come up with a copyright claim for us. It's like we're claiming our own video automatically. I don't know. So yes, you'll see those, but the copyright claims aren't a violation on your account. But yes, you can use these on Zoom, online, on Facebook, so forth.
When you get it from our shop too, it has all the copyright information, so you can just copy paste that if you're putting like at the end of, you know, your bulletin or whatever, you can put that copyright information. And then we are on CCLI too, so we appreciate when people report to CCLI, but if you don't have CCLI, that's fine too. So, yeah.
So yeah, you can find things that we've been doing to help resource churches, and started doing a lot of during the pandemic, and we're continuing to do because we find that people, you know, this is the kind of piece that you could play within your worship service if your people are there. You know, it's not just for online use. So, and you know, we also love to hear from people. Like, I really need this in my church, you know, I wish there was a thing like this. And, you know, so feel free to always reach out to us if there are things that you would love to see, and we can always see what we can do to help. So, one of the things that, if you want to go to the next slide, I think many of you have probably seen this quote from Rachel Held Evans, talking about her book, Searching for Sunday. But, you know, she's really talking about what people need in worship and how important, it's not about a bigger show or a better show. It's about the importance of honesty and lament and confession. And it's something that is very important to us. I think we have found one of the things that I think led us to begin this work was because we really wanted to have more honesty within worship, and felt like a lot of times people were, it wasn't a place you could go and tell the truth. I'll just say that, you know, it was like you had to go and look good and say you're doing fine. And there was no place to actually sort of confess or to say, I am really deeply sad today. And there was no way to do that in many, many worship services. And we felt like the Psalms are full of lament. Why are we not offering people an opportunity? And people long for that, and long for that kind of honesty. So that's something that we started trying to do a lot more of and incorporate. And again, ritual was a key piece of that. We started developing these sort of new rituals that allowed us the space and opportunity to share our laments. And one of the places that we started doing that, if you, Tracy, could go a couple of slides ahead, was at one of the first places that invited us to do it was a Wild Goose Festival. I think somebody mentioned this morning, yes, Tracy. And so you know, just as an example, I don't know if somebody wants to talk about what we did. Does anybody else want to talk about that? This was our first one, the Doors one, yeah.
I can tell the door story,
Sure.
the end of it.
Just the whole thing.
Oh, you can tell the whole thing.
Well, okay.
Tell like how we did the lament and.
Because it's a moment, you know, like when you're creating something, you're like, is this a spoiler alert? Okay. So Wild Goose Festival, for those who haven't been, it's in the Rocky Mountains or the Smoky Mountains, North Carolina. And I am a city boy. I'm not here for being in the woods and stuff, but we're having this gathering. We're outdoors under a tent, a giant tent. Probably could hold as many as people are here, maybe a little bit bigger. But we're under this tent and we are figuring out what does it mean for us to gather and have this midnight experience that we're creating. And so we decided to make this about the doors that we have in our lives. And for context, there was a lot of conversations about immigration going on at the time. There was in North Carolina, there had just been legislation passed about bathrooms and transgender people not being able to use the bathrooms that are in line with their gender identity. And so we wanted to be present and use our voices in ways that we could use it. And so we found doors. We had some of our friends who are great at going thrifting, find us doors, skinny doors, big doors, little doors. They even found a bathroom door. And we set that door in the middle of the tent when there was a giant pole holding up the whole tent. We set that door on there and we made liturgy around it. And so we did things like we added pictures of refugees to these doors, people who have been kept out by doors. And we talked about the things we like about doors, like being able to lock the bathroom door and keep our privacy or to keep our stuff inside, right? We talked about the trans women who had been killed that year. We named their names and we invited people to kind of have their own wailing wall moment and add names and pictures and anything they wanted to these doors that are in the center and around the room. And so we had poetry, we had songs, we engaged people in multiple ways in a very unusual time and space. And as we came to the end of the night, we did a poem and we literally banged on that door. And I was the one who was banging on the door and the whole tent shook. But when I tell you that after we banged on that door, we took that door down and we laid it across and brought the elements. And the door that represented in the state that said that some people can't go through this door, we literally made it into a door for communion. And so what are we able to do when we sit with what's going on and I don't think you can preach a better sermon than to literally invite people to take the elements, to bring the elements, to take the elements and to celebrate around the thing that was very literally used to keep people out.
And we did sing All Belong Here as we took communion on that door, around that door. So. I think the other thing we want to talk about just a little bit is about this idea that we live in a very multicultural kind of world, and often our churches are very monoculture place spaces, and it's something that we've done quite a bit of thinking and talking about. I know Jonathan is actually working very specifically on that right now at the church. And LaSalle, I think, is a place that for a long time has been having conversations about this issue, but it is an ongoing and nuanced and continuing conversation that Jonathan has continued to lead. And it opens up lots of different questions every time you have the conversation. I don't know if you want to speak to that anymore than you have already, Jonathan, but okay. So I guess the big thing is that, unless anybody else wanted to talk about that, but I do think that the big thing is like being careful about misappropriation, appropriating other people's cultures without giving credit. And I think also just trying to be aware of ourselves as situated in a particular culture. Like I think there is, as a white person who lives in this society, I can just assume a lot, I can walk into a space and assume a whole lot of stuff. And I think we don't necessarily talk about that within our churches very often, that this is a space that is very, very friendly. And I'm assuming most of your churches fall in this category, very, very friendly and comfortable for middle class-ish or, whatever white people. And perhaps less so for other people. And what does that mean? And how do we begin to think about that and talk about that? And how can we open up this space in some way so that it could feel more open and welcoming and a place where other people could belong? Those are big questions.
I just want to say that one of the most helpful things we did practically at LaSalle Street Church was invite neighborhood churches to worship with us and to invite their, in this case, musicians, and to do workshops with us, to teach us how to sing their music, to teach us how to worship in the way, like at this is LaSalle is basically a white professionals, middle-class church. And so, to do the kind of music that we did even this morning, and to it's like a traditional Presbyterian church. Yeah, it's hard to clap along. It's people are very much in their heads, that sort of thing. And so I felt like when I got there that I needed some way to teach folks that there was more to Christianity, there was more to God than we could understand. And some of it we were going to learn through our bodies, and some of it we're going to learn through dance, and some of it we're going to learn just by listening to other people. Some of it we're going to learn by having experiences of other ways people worship.
Or speaking different languages.
Or speaking different languages, yeah. And so we brought in these churches to teach us. Really, we used to have these gospel festivals, and we'd bring in some of the churches to partner with us from the south side of Chicago. And I was just, their congregation would, all come and sit next to my congregation. And my congregation learned how to clap along. They learned how to sing. They learned how to do
2
it.
and the 3. So on the 4, actually, sorry.
Yeah. And yeah, and it was that kind of thing. It was, we need to, this is, as opposed to we need to just be quiet a lot and learn from people and learn from all these other, we need to learn how to dance, and we need to learn what about God these people, other cultures and traditions can teach us. And that will come in, and then we'd be much more natural about doing it, as opposed to bringing it in from the top or that sort of thing.
I want to say something surprising. I'm Black.
What?
That's not the surprise. Many people who are white don't know they're white. What does that mean in our church? What does it mean that I'm Black, but you don't know that in this country that make me Black, that you are white, and that whiteness in this country has a culture, it has music, it has language, it has nuances. And so sometimes when people are trying to figure out, well, why does nobody come to our church? Everyone's welcome. We're not realizing that our church is white. And that until we know what our whiteness is, it's gonna be a thing where it's just like, well, you're Black, you should like it here. I don't see any Blackness, and I'm not just talking about skin. I'm talking about culture, I'm talking about language, I'm talking about ritual, I'm talking about tradition, I'm talking about what's okay and what's not okay. Because like the preacher said today, I need to hear amen. And y'all heard me all the way over there. Because that's part of the culture. It's a call and response. It's a collaborative culture. It is respectful to collaborate with the preacher who's got the mic. But if your church doesn't know its own culture and can't own we usually like to do things this way, instead of saying this is the right way. This is our way. And then when we know what our way is, we're able to go and find out about some other ways.
Thanks, Terry.
Yeah. So the reason I hung back a little bit is just because I think and talk about and work in this area of ministry a lot. And I don't know, I can go in a whole bunch of different directions. So I'm kind of asking God where to focus right now. And I want to come back to an image that we talked about just a little bit ago, the question of a table that belongs to you versus a table that you're only invited to sit at. I think, so I mentioned I grew up in the Presbyterian church. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago called Libertyville. It is 20 minutes south of the Wisconsin border. I could count the number of Asian Americans in my high school class on my two hands. And I did not realize growing up how much I was internalizing a culture, a dominant culture of suburban whiteness that was around me. I think in a lot of our churches, like Darren is saying, we have a lot of kind of understood, subtly communicated or not so subtly communicated norms that establish this is how we do things here. This is the kind of person that fits here. This is the kind of person that belongs here. This is this is the way we understand God and our relationship to God. And without getting into the whole theology behind diversity and why diversity in community is the only way we really can reflect an infinite God and come to understand an infinite God, I think what we really need to be thinking about as we're trying to create meaningful worship spaces for people is examining those norms, examining the ways we've always done things, looking at the stuff that consciously or unconsciously communicates this is who belongs and this is who doesn't belong here. That's your first tool, is taking a step back and looking at who are we really? What are we doing? What is that saying? What is that communicating? To use divine imagination, to borrow a phrase, to put yourself into the shoes of someone who's experiencing it, maybe for the first time, and say, who would feel like they fit here? Who might feel like they wouldn't fit here? And can we do anything to change that? Can we do anything to communicate to them that they are loved, they do belong here, and that not only are we offering them a seat at the table, but we're offering them the ability to shape how that table is formed, how we come together, the rules of etiquette, the way that we come in the door and gather together, all of that stuff. Practically, that's looked for me like recognizing that, one, you really can't do any of that alone. It's not super sustainable to try and shift a culture of an entire institution by yourself. So find your people, find the folks who are about this work with you, who can help support you, who can be a sounding board for ideas. I've had the joy of being able to bring these guys into LaSalle on many occasions. Recently, an experiment that we were trying, that Krista and Christina and I got to experiment on, was a completely roundtable planned worship service. I told them the theme and then said, the three of us, no one's going to be making a final decision per se. And we've been experimenting with how that sort of thing works. But then just one last practical thing is, I think when you're introducing new modes of worship or new styles or new cultures, and you're inviting your community to cross cultures with you in worship, rather than trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink at it, start with something that you can repeat, that you can learn together, and that then you can make part of your practice of worship. You want to get to a point where you're embodying it, and it's something that is natural to you as a community. You've learned the story behind it. You've taught them how to experience it in a different way, and how that helps form their relationship with God. And it's not just a kind of a one-off token thing that we do for the moment, but it's something that's worked its way into your being, the fabric of your life as a church together.
So obviously we could talk about this for a long time, and I feel bad that we didn't hear too much from Krista and Christina. Did you have anything that we didn't give you the mic enough? So, but I just want to see if anybody, we have like 1-2 minutes left, and if anybody had any pressing questions, then we could try to answer quickly, or we're also happy to talk about things, stick around and talk about things. I'm sorry.
Any of you online, you can put them in the chat.
Yes, or if you're online, you can put them in a chat.
Because we can't see your faces with the screen. I can stop screen sharing if that.
Oh, there's one back here.
I think one of the greatest risks is jargon. And we don't recognize it as jargon because it's our language, right? And so one of the things I appreciate about what you've been doing today and others, like some of the Wild Goose worship stuff, sanctified art, is using language that's more natural, recognizable, feels like, yeah, it's theologically it's the same, but we forget in the church that we're speaking a certain language, we're comfortable with it. The risk is also we stop thinking what it means. So I think jargon is one of the places to pay attention to.
That's a
Totally
great point.
agree. Yeah, great point.
One more. Is it really possible to put new wine in old wineskins?
Yes. Yes.
Don't you have to like bust the old wineskin when you do it?
Well, okay, so I love this question. I think it's both and. You can, go to new wineskin, but what can you do with that old wineskin, right? So one of the things to answer your question, there was a thought that's been ringing in my mind really quickly, because I know we don't have a lot of time. When I was talking about ritual before, it dropped into my spirit. We are made in thy image, the image of the Creator. We are creators. Let me say that again. We are made in thy image. So that means that we are creators. We are innately creators. That means that each and every one of us walks around with power. Whether you claim it, whether you use it in a way that you're conscious of, everything you do is imbued with the power of creation, because we are created beings with creative power, right? So when you come together, you're talking about, can you add something to old wineskins? There's power in the fermentation of that wineskin. What can you do with it? As creators, when we're becoming more cognizant at certain points in this talk, we've talked about unraveling basically our rituals and being cognizant of what we're doing as creators with power. So when you come together with your congregations and you're asking the questions, you're asking about what is our culture? What is our belief? What are our rituals? What are our intentions? What are our desires? Ooh, that can be a scary word, because we've been taught that our desires as humans can be unsavory. But if we're not talking about that at the most sacred space that we're creating, which is church, where are we going to talk about them? So as you come together and you go forth into these communities that are beloved and sacred to each of you, it's important to remember your power. But when we talk about power, right, we relegate it to God only. We are made in thy image. We really are. We're here on this earth with power to create, and we're here to love. And the creation aspect is how we love. So being cognizant of the power you wield helps you be a better creator, therefore a better lover. And that's how you be like God. That's how you imbue and walk with the Christ consciousns. Okay.
Okay, I think we just got a little sermon there at the end from Leslie. All right, thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. And if we'll be sticking around, if people want to chat some more, we really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks all you people online. We will see you at the next whatever you show up for. Take care.